The hospital room is quiet except for the machines. White walls. White sheets. A man who was never meant to be vulnerable lying beneath them like something already gone. Lucien Arvello's eyes are open. Watching. Always watching. Zarelle Baptiste stands in the doorway, frozen. Her white cap catches the overhead light. Her hand hovers near her mouth, as if she's about to speak something that will destroy them both. He hasn't moved toward her. He doesn't need to. His presence fills the room like smoke. Tell me the truth. Not a request. Not a conversation starter. A command wrapped in 3 words that make the monitors jump. The accusation hidden in 3 words, tell me the truth, doesn't mean, speak honestly. It means, I know you're lying. I know you know something. I've figured out who you are, and now you can't hide anymore. He's not asking. He's confronting. Her breath catches somewhere between her lungs and her lips. Her eyes betray her, fear, recognition, the terrible clarity of being seen. For 3 years, she's been invisible. Now he's asking. One morning in September, she watched Lucien light a cigarette, hold it, then set it down without taking a single drag. The cigarette meant nothing to anyone else, just abandoned on marble. But Zarelle understood, even the smallest break in ritual signals something massive. When the hospital called on a Tuesday, they asked for the household staff member who handled his personal schedule. That was her. Acute leukemia, aggressive variant, treatment options limited. She understood what the unlit cigarette meant. She understood what Lucien would do, refuse treatment, refuse hospitals, refuse weakness. But eventually, the body wins. One evening in October, she found him in his study with the pistol on the desk, his hand on the gun. Not loading it. Not pointing it. Just touching it. She didn't react. She simply said, I brought you dinner, sir, and left. But she knew everything had changed. A powerful man holding a gun is a man running out of time, trying to control the ending before the ending controls him. 2 weeks later, he called her into his office. I'm going to the hospital, he said. For time. I want to know exactly how much I have. She realized then, he was reclaiming control by surrendering to it. Not going to be cured. Going to negotiate with death. The hospital room became his new empire. Same control, different setting. He ruled from the bed through presence, through silence. But something was different now. The machines kept him alive but immobilized. Everything he'd built his power on, control, precision, dominance, was being stripped away. And she was there. Every shift. Every morning. Every night he woke afraid. Zarelle brought water. Adjusted pillows. Cleaned him with a gentleness that suggested she saw him as human, not king. She had the discipline of someone trained to be invisible, but the intelligence of someone who understood everything. She never flinched at his pain, but always, looked away when he cried. One night in December, their eyes met while she was adjusting his medication. Really met. For the first time in years. She was looking at him like someone who knows you completely. Not like staff. Like a witness. And he understood, she knows something about me. Something I've spent my entire life hiding. His hand moved to the call button. But he didn't press it. What's your name? He asked. After 3 years, he was finally asking. Zarelle Baptiste, she said quietly. How long have you known? He asked. She didn't ask what he meant. She understood perfectly. Since the beginning, she said. I was there. Those 4 words unlocked something in him. A door sealed for decades. He stopped asking her to leave the room. He stopped maintaining distance. He started asking her things, not commanding, but asking. She never answered directly, just looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Until the morning when his fever spiked and she sat beside his bed and held his hand, not a nurse's touch, but a human gesture, and whispered, I'm here. You're not alone. And he understood, she wasn't waiting for anything. She was just staying. That night, lying in the dark listening to the machines breathe for him, Lucien made a decision. He was running out of time. Days now, maybe less. He couldn't die with this question unanswered. Tomorrow morning, when she came in with his coffee, he would ask. Tell me the truth. And she would freeze. Her hand would go to her mouth. Her breath would catch. Because she would understand that the moment had finally come, the moment where her invisibility would end, and his denial would end, and the thing neither of them had ever spoken aloud would finally be named. The conference room was silent. 14 men sat around a table that cost more than most houses, and none of them were speaking because Lucien Arvello didn't want them to. He sat at the head, fingers steepled, dark eyes moving from face to face like a judge assessing guilt. His navy suit was tailored so precisely it looked like armor. The cufflinks were gold, not flashy, just heavy enough to mean something. Everything about him meant something. The shipment, he said quietly. Not a question. An observation. Vincent Mercer, the distributor, shifted in his chair. It's secure. 3 routes confirmed, all. Lucien raised one finger. Just one. Vincent stopped mid-sentence. I didn't ask for an explanation, Lucien said. His voice was smooth as water, which made it terrifying. I asked about the shipment. Vincent understood the difference. His jaw tightened. 16 hours, Vincent said. It arrives in 16 hours. Lucien nodded once and looked away. The meeting continued without him saying another word, but everyone in that room understood. The decision had been made, Vincent's fate was sealed, the shipment would arrive, and if anything went wrong, Vincent would disappear so completely his mother would think he'd never been born. This was how Lucien Arvello ruled. Not through violence advertised. Through silence weaponized. By evening, Vincent Mercer had vanished. Not dead, at least, not yet. Just gone. A man could be gone for a long time in Lucien's world before he was actually gone. The penthouse was empty when Lucien returned. 40 stories above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows showing a skyline he'd built himself, not literally, but in the sense that every negotiation, every whispered threat, every man who'd disappeared had strengthened his control over this place. He poured himself whiskey. The glass was crystal, the kind that chimed when ice touched it. He liked that sound. It meant something pure still existed in a room that had never contained purity. His phone rang. His mother. Mama, he answered, but didn't raise the phone to his ear immediately. He held it at a distance, buying himself a moment. I was going to call you. Her voice came through tinny and urgent in Italian. She wanted to see him. It had been 3 weeks. Was he eating? Was he safe? Had he made peace with God yet? He would never make peace with God. God didn't make peace with men like him. Sunday, he said, cutting her off gently. I'll come Sunday. He hung up before she could say more. Before she could hear something wrong in his voice. Because there was something wrong. He felt it in his chest, not pain, not yet. Just a tightness that had started 2 weeks ago and wouldn't leave. He'd pushed it down, the way he pushed down everything. The way power required. He set down his glass and pressed his hand to his ribs, feeling his heartbeat against his palm. Steady. Controlled. Still obeying. For now. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, the Whisper King sat alone with a feeling he couldn't command into submission, drinking whiskey that tasted like the beginning of the end. Zarelle Baptiste learned how to be invisible on her first day. The woman showing her around, Patricia, the house manager, pointed at rooms and said things like, "You'll clean this on Mondays," and "Mr. Arvello doesn't like to be spoken to before noon," as if Zarelle was a robot receiving programming. Patricia's eyes never quite focused on her face. Nobody's ever did. Zarelle had learned young that if you moved quietly enough, made yourself useful enough, people's brains simply classified you as furniture. By the second week, she understood the penthouse's rhythm. Lucien left at 7, returned at 9. He slept in the master bedroom but spent most nights in his study. The whiskey glass always ended up on the mahogany desk, always empty, always placed precisely at the corner like a ritual. She cleaned around these patterns, becoming part of them. It was during her third week when she heard the conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Lucien was on the phone in his office. She'd only come in to collect the glass, and his voice was different. Softer. Terrified. The numbers don't look good, he was saying. Not to a business associate. To a doctor. How long? Zarel's hand froze on the glass. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. She was so perfectly invisible that even the air forgot she was there. 6 months. Maybe a year, the voice on the phone said. She heard it through the speaker, tinny and official. We'll need to start treatment immediately. She left the glass where it was and slipped out. But something had changed. She couldn't unsee it now. The tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching. The careful movements, like each step required calculation. One evening, she was cleaning his office. She shouldn't have been there. He should have told her not to enter. But he didn't stop her. He was too tired to maintain the boundary of privacy. His phone was on the desk. A message lit the screen before he could hide it. Prognosis, 6 to 12 months. Treatment options limited. She didn't read more. She turned away. But she'd seen enough. The unfinished coffee made sense now. The careful movements made sense. The way he sometimes looked at his office, his empire of leather and mahogany, like he was memorizing it, made sense. She left the glass where it was and slipped out. But something had changed. She couldn't unsee it now. The tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching. The way he'd stand in front of the windows at midnight, one hand pressed to his chest. The morning she found him in the kitchen with a cigarette unlit, just holding it like it was a question he couldn't answer. A man doesn't touch his chest like that unless something is breaking inside. She watched him differently after that. Not out of curiosity, out of recognition. She knew what it meant to carry something you couldn't tell anyone. She'd been carrying her own weight for so long that she recognized the particular heaviness in his shoulders. 3 years ago, she'd witnessed something. An event. A night that made Lucien Arvello the man he was, the Whisper King, the man who moved through the world leaving erasure in his wake. She'd been there. She'd seen it. And she'd spent 3 years understanding exactly what she'd seen and what it meant. Now, watching him slowly diminish in his own penthouse, she realized, he didn't know she knew. He had no idea that the invisible maid had collected pieces of his secret simply by existing in the spaces he occupied. She was dangerous. Not because she was threatening. But because she was witnessing. She was dangerous because she was the only person in his world who could see him, truly see him, and hadn't used it against him. Yet. One afternoon, she was changing the sheets in his bedroom. He came in unexpectedly, moving like he was conserving energy. He didn't acknowledge her. But for a moment, his eyes met hers in the mirror. And she saw it, he was beginning to suspect that she knew. The question was only a matter of time. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and apology. Lucien sat in a leather chair that was meant to be comfortable but felt like a device designed to extract confession. The woman across from him, Dr. Chin, gray-haired, speaking with the gentle certainty of someone who delivered bad news 1,000 times, used the word aggressive 3 times in one sentence. Acute leukemia. Aggressive variant. Limited treatment options. 6 months, she said. Possibly a year with chemotherapy. But the side effects. He stood up. The appointment was over. Mr. Arvello, I really think we should discuss. I'll have my office contact you, he said, and left. He didn't accept treatment. He refused the hospital. He returned to the penthouse and drank whiskey and told himself he was fine, that the weakness in his legs was stress, that the way his vision sometimes blurred was just exhaustion. Men like him didn't get sick. Sickness was for people who lacked control. But control was slipping. 2 weeks later, he collapsed during a phone call. Zarel found him on the study floor, one hand still clutching the phone. She didn't call an ambulance, she knew he'd refuse. Instead, she got him upstairs to his bed, brought him water, and said nothing about what she'd seen, the sweat soaking through his shirt, the tremor he couldn't suppress, the moment his body admitted what his mind refused. He grabbed her wrist. "Tell no one." "Of course," she said, and meant it. By October, he couldn't hide it anymore. His suits hung on him. His hands shook. The careful grooming that had been his armor began to slip. One morning, Zarel found him in the bathroom, gripping the sink, staring at a face he didn't recognize. She stood in the doorway, invisible again, and watched him understand that surrender was no longer optional. "I'll go," he said, not looking at her. "To the hospital." "I'll go." The first visit was a Wednesday. Zarel drove him. He'd stopped driving weeks ago, though he'd never admit why. The hospital was all white walls and beeping machines, designed to strip dignity from everyone who entered. He sat through blood tests and scans with the expression of a man attending his own execution. When they returned to the penthouse, she helped him to bed. His arm around her shoulders felt like holding a bird made of bone and desperation. She settled him under the covers and was turning to leave when he grabbed her hand. "Zarel." She turned. His eyes were different now, older, terrified, human in a way the Whisper King had never allowed himself to be. "Don't tell anyone," he said again. "Not the business. Not my mother. Not anyone." She understood what he was really asking. "Don't let anyone see me like this." "I know," she said, and squeezed his hand once before letting go. She left the room knowing what she'd just agreed to. She was now the keeper of his secret. The only person in his world who saw him falling and didn't use it against him. She was dangerous now. And he was finally beginning to understand why. The hospital room was designed to steal power from everyone who entered it. Fluorescent lights. Beeping machines. A bed that could be adjusted by remote control. The illusion of authority when you couldn't actually move. Lucien Arvello understood immediately that this room was his enemy in a way Vincent Mercer had never been. His first night, he didn't sleep. The machines kept time like a heartbeat that wasn't quite his own, and every few hours a nurse would come in to check vitals, inject something into his fore, take his blood pressure as if his body still mattered. It did matter. That was the horror, his body mattered more here than anywhere else in his life. Here, he was defined entirely by what was breaking inside him. Around 3 a.m., he considered the gun he no longer had access to. Around 4 a.m., he stopped considering it. Zarel arrived at dawn with flowers. Not the kind a hospital expected, not the sterile arrangements from the gift shop. These were real. Roses, bleeding red against the white walls. She set them on the windowsill where he could see them without moving. "For the smell," she said simply. Hospital rooms shouldn't smell like nothing. He wanted to dismiss her kindness as professional obligation. But he was too tired to maintain that fiction. Over the next week, she became his primary handler. The nurses came and went, but Zarel was constant. She adjusted his pillows before he asked. She brought him water that was actually cold. She changed the flowers when they started to wilt, replacing nothing with something, understanding that small acts of care were the only power left in this room. One morning, she found him trying to work, phone in hand, attempting to make a call about the shipment, about compensation, about maintaining control from a hospital bed. His hands were shaking too badly to hold the phone steady. She watched him understand that the empire was running without him. That business continued whether the king was conscious or not. He dropped the phone. When she picked it up, she didn't comment on the crack in his voice when he said, "I can't do this." She just placed the phone on the bedside table, out of reach, and left. He cried after she left. Quietly, the way powerful men cried, pretending they weren't, as if tears were a private emergency no one needed to know about. But she knew. She always knew. By the second week, something shifted. He stopped trying to work. Stopped trying to maintain the fiction that the Whisper King was still operating from a bed in a hospital that smelled like dying. He began, instead, to watch her. The way she moved through the room with purpose but no urgency. The way she handled his things, his documents, his medications, his phone, with the kind of careful attention that suggested she understood their weight. The way she sometimes looked at him when she thought he was asleep. One afternoon, their eyes met while she was adjusting his fore. Not an accident. Not a glance. A full, conscious moment of recognition. And in that moment, he saw it, she knew something. Something fundamental. Something about him that went deeper than the cancer, deeper than the penthouse, deeper than the Whisper King. The question formed in his mind, how long has she known? And underneath that, what is she waiting for? He was still trying to figure out the answer when the machines around him beeped, indifferent to revelation, counting down the hours he had left to understand. Something was wrong with her eyes. Lucien noticed it on a Wednesday morning when the light was bright enough to make everything visible. Zarel was adjusting his medications, a routine she performed with practiced precision, but her gaze kept drifting to something beyond the fore bag, beyond the room, beyond the present moment. Worry. That was the word his brain supplied. But worry about what? Not about his comfort. She had that mastered. Not about the machines or his vitals, the nurses handled that. This was different. This was the kind of worry someone carried when they were holding something dangerous and afraid it might slip. You were here, he said suddenly. Not a question. She stopped mid-motion. Her hand froze on the fore valve. In the penthouse, he continued. Before I hired you. You were there. Mr. Arvello. Don't. He cut her off with his voice, not his hand, because his hands had lost their ability to command. I remember now. There was a night. Years ago. You were there. She set down the medication carefully and stepped back, her composure fracturing at the edges. I think we should wait until you're stronger to have this conversation. I don't want to wait. The desperation in his voice surprised even him. I want to know what you know. She moved toward the door, but he spoke again. Why didn't you tell anyone? She stopped. Her hand on the doorframe. The question hung between them, unanswered. You could have gone to the police, he said, his voice thin but relentless. You could have destroyed me with whatever you witnessed. Why are you still here? Why are you protecting me? I'm not protecting you, she said quietly. I'm protecting what happened. There's a difference. The distinction shattered something in him. She wasn't loyal to him. She was loyal to the truth. And the truth was something she'd been carrying alone for years while he built an empire on the foundation of not speaking about it. Tell me, he said. She turned to face him, and her eyes, those eyes that had been watching him since the beginning, were full of a grief so old it had fossilized into something resembling peace. Not yet, she said. Not while you're sick. Not while you're still trying to control everything around you. When you ask me for the truth, you have to be ready to stop lying to yourself first. I'm not lying. You are, she interrupted, gentle but absolute. You're lying about why you let yourself deteriorate. You're lying about whether you wanted to survive this. You're lying about what that night meant to you. She moved closer, and there was something almost like tenderness in her voice. When you ask me for the truth, you have to mean it. You have to be willing to let it change you. After she left, he lay in the hospital bed and understood what was happening. He was being held accountable by the only person in his world who had never asked anything of him except his honesty. He couldn't die without knowing. That Zarel had been waiting for him to become desperate enough, broken enough, human enough to ask the question she'd been ready to answer all along. It would take him 4 more days. But the question was forming now, crystallizing into something inevitable. Tell me the truth. He was going to ask her. And she was going to answer. And everything would change. It was 4:47 a.m. when Lucien pressed the call button. Not the nurse call. The one he'd had wired directly to Zarel's phone, a private line she'd set up without explaining why. She arrived within minutes, moving through the dark hospital hallway like someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. She knew. Before he spoke, she knew. He sat up, slowly, carefully, every movement a negotiation with his own body, and watched her enter. The machines beeped their indifferent rhythm around him. The city beyond the window was still sleeping. Zarel, he said. Just her name. Just the way it should be spoken, not as a command to a maid, but as an acknowledgement of someone fully present. She stopped at the foot of the bed. Tell me the truth. 4 words. Simpler than before. More dangerous. Her hand flew to her mouth. He saw it happen, the involuntary gesture, the body's instinct to stop something from escaping. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, a sound so quiet it was almost silence. She knew exactly what he was asking. Not for her to explain herself. Not to justify her presence in his life. But to finally speak the thing that lived in the space between them. Years. It had been years of carrying this. He could see it in the way her hand trembled against her lips. In the way her eyes, those eyes that had witnessed everything, filled with something that looked like grief, or release, or both. Don't, she started, but the word broke. Don't ask me that. I have to. His voice was firm, but underneath was the fragility of a man who had nothing left to lose. I'm running out of time. I need to know what you know. She stepped back. Turned away. Her shoulders rose and fell with breathing that didn't seem under her control anymore. When she turned back, tears were running down her face, not the careful, hidden tears he'd cried in the bathroom, but open, unprotected tears. If I tell you, she said, everything changes. You won't be able to go back to not knowing. You won't be able to keep pretending. I know, he said. You'll have to face what you did. Why you became who you are. I know. She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't resist. The pull between them was almost visible now, the weight of years spent in the same rooms, breathing the same air, carrying a secret that belonged to both of them. Once I speak it, she whispered, I can't protect it anymore. It becomes yours to carry. All of it. He reached out his hand. Not commanding. Offering. Asking. She looked at his hand like it was a door she'd been standing in front of for 3 years, waiting for permission to open. Tell me the truth, he said again. Quieter this time. Almost begging. The silence stretched. The hospital machines counted out seconds. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. She opened her mouth. The words gathered in her throat like something alive, something that had been waiting to be born. Yes, she whispered. I'll tell you. And in that moment, the moment before the confession, the moment of perfect suspension between silence and truth, everything changed. The secret was about to be spoken. And both of them would never be the same. Her name was Elena, Zarel said. Her voice shook on the first syllable. She stood at the window, unable to look at him while speaking the name aloud for the first time in years. The city below was waking, indifferent to confession, to secrets finally exhaled into the sterile hospital air. She was beautiful, Zarel continued. I only saw her twice, but I remember how she moved. Like she was apologizing for taking up space. Lucien's hand tightened on the hospital bed rail. Elena. He hadn't heard anyone speak her name since the divorce. Since he'd buried her beneath layers of silence and reinvention. You were different then, Zarel said. Softer. Not weak, but softer. You laughed. I heard you laughing in your office once, and I didn't understand how a man who laughed like that became. She trailed off. Turned to face him. She was going to leave you, Zarel said quietly. She'd written a letter. I was cleaning your study and I found it. She was afraid of you. Not because you'd hurt her, because she knew you could hurt her and you were. Slowly. By trying to control everything about her. By treating her presence as something to be managed. He couldn't speak. That night, Zarel continued, her words coming faster now, urgent. I was in the house. Delivering groceries. I heard arguing. She was crying. You were. She paused, searching for the word. You were explaining. Like you always do. Using logic to crush her reasons for leaving. And she just broke. Right there in the kitchen. She said she couldn't breathe in your world anymore. Lucien's eyes were closed. Zarel could see his chest moving, breathing that wasn't under his control anymore. You told her if she left, you'd make sure she never saw her family again. You said you'd take everything, the money, the house, her reputation. You said she'd be erased. The words landed like stones. She left anyway, Zarel whispered. That night. She packed a bag and walked out. And you let her go because for the first time, someone called your bluff. Someone chose herself over your power. She stepped closer. But you couldn't accept it. So you did what you said you'd do. You erased her. Cut off her accounts. Made calls. She disappeared from your world completely. And you became harder after that. Colder. You stopped believing in anything soft. You became the Whisper King because Elena taught you that softness was weakness. Lucien opened his eyes. They were flooded. Why? He whispered. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because, Zarel said, and her own voice broke, I understood something in that moment. You weren't a villain trying to destroy her. You were a man terrified of losing control. And she had to leave because staying meant disappearing into you. But she was stronger than you thought. She wiped her eyes. And I stayed with you because someone had to remember that version of you. The version that loved her. The version that could be reached. The hospital room was impossibly small now. The confession had filled every inch, every corner, every space between them. I carried this so you wouldn't have to carry it alone, Zarel said. And so that when you were finally ready to surrender, really surrender, you'd have someone who'd already seen you without your armor. Lucien wept. Not quietly. Not with control. But openly, completely, for the first time in decades. And Zarel stayed. 3 days passed in silence. Not the kind of silence that meant distance. The kind that meant everything had changed and there were no words adequate to the change. Lucien lay in his hospital bed and moved through the confession like someone walking through a house they'd lived in their whole life but were seeing for the first time. Elena. He'd buried her so completely that he'd forgotten she existed. Now she was everywhere, in the way Zarel moved through the room, in the shape of the truth, in the grief he'd been running from for a decade. Zarel didn't leave. She could have. The confession was done. The secret was spoken. She could have returned to invisibility, to the safer space of being a maid rather than a witness. Instead, she stayed. She was afraid, he could see it in the way she hesitated before entering the room, the way she kept small distances between them, as if she wasn't sure he wouldn't turn the revelation into a weapon. On the 4th day, he asked her to sit. Zarel, he said. Just her name. Then, thank you. 2 words that felt like learning a new language. She sat in the visitor's chair and didn't look at him. I spent years, he continued slowly, trying to erase her. Trying to erase what I did. Trying to become someone who would never be vulnerable to that kind of loss again. He paused. I became a monster to avoid becoming soft. You became afraid, Zarel corrected quietly. There's a difference. He looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who'd watched him destroy his own capacity for love and stayed anyway. Who'd carried his secret as if it was sacred. Who'd trusted him with the truth despite knowing exactly who he was. Why? He asked. Not the question from before. A different one. Deeper. Why did you stay? After you knew what I'd done to Elena, why didn't you leave? She was quiet for a long time. Because, she said finally, I saw you laugh. I saw you love her. I saw the man you could have been if fear hadn't won. And I couldn't abandon that version of you. Someone had to believe he could exist again. He wept then. Not from shame this time, but from the weight of being believed in by someone who had every reason to condemn him. Over the next week, they talked about Elena, carefully, like handling something that could break. Zarel shared small memories, the way Elena hummed while making tea, the letter she'd left, the fear in her voice. Lucien spoke about the man he'd been before, the man who'd loved her and then destroyed that love with control. Do you know where she is? He asked one afternoon. No, Zarel said. She wanted to disappear completely. She wanted you to have no power over her, even the power of knowing her location. He nodded. That was Elena's final act of control, taking her existence entirely away from him. I'm sorry, he said to Zarel. For what I became. For how I treated everyone after she left. She didn't absolve him. She didn't need to. She simply said, I know. And in those two words was everything, the acknowledgement of his guilt, the acceptance of his grief, the beginning of something neither of them had names for. Not forgiveness. Not quite love. But a bond forged in truth and sustained by the willingness to see each other clearly. The machines beeped around them. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the small redemption happening in a hospital room on the 42nd floor. They sat in the new silence together, the silence of people who'd spoken everything and found there was still room for more. In his final weeks, Lucien Arvello stopped being the Whisper King. It happened gradually, then all at once. First, he called his second-in-command and told him the truth, that the empire was built on fear, not strength. That the men who'd stayed were staying out of calculation, not loyalty. That everything would need to be dismantled or rebuilt on different foundations. Mr. Arvello, the man said, confused, what are you saying? I'm saying, Lucien replied, his voice thin but steady, that I'm done pretending. You'll run this however you see fit. I won't be here to enforce it. Then he hung up. His mother came to the hospital on a Tuesday. She'd been coming weekly, bringing soup that the machines wouldn't let him eat, speaking in rapid Italian about family obligations and God's mercy. But this time, when she entered the room, she stopped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She was looking at a man at peace. Lucien had never been at peace. His mother knew this in the way you know your own child, the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw perpetually clenched, the distance he kept from everyone, including her. But now, watching her son die, she saw something she'd been waiting 40 years to see, softness. Acceptance. Surrender. Mama, he said, and gestured for her to sit. She sat, and he took her hand, something he'd never done as an adult. I'm sorry, he said. For the man I became. For the distance I kept. For making you raise me and then never letting you truly know me. She wept. At first from shock, then from relief. Her son was finally coming home, finally arriving at the place she'd been waiting for him all along. Zarel was always there. In the mornings, she brought him water and adjusted his pillows. In the afternoons, she sat beside him in silence or in conversation. In the nights, when pain kept him awake and the machines counted out the hours, she stayed. Not as a nurse. As a witness to his final transformation. He allowed her to care for him in ways he'd never allowed anyone. To clean his body without shame. To see him afraid. To be present for every small surrender. One afternoon, in the brightness of a moment when the pain medication made him lucid and clear, he said to her, "Thank you for staying." "Where else would I be?" she replied. "Anywhere," he said. "You could be anywhere. But you stayed." "Yes," she said. "I stayed." By the 3rd week of February, the doctors stopped pretending about recovery. The cancer had taken what little the illness had left him. He was ready. He'd said what needed saying. He'd grieved what needed grieving. He'd apologized to his mother. He'd released his empire. He'd been seen, completely and without armor, and survived it. His final day came without announcement. The machines registered the slowing. His breathing became something he had to think about. Zarel sat beside his bed, holding his hand. "Elena?" he asked, near the end. "She's gone," Zarel said gently. "Free." He nodded. That was right. That was how it should be. His last words were simple: "Tell them I tried." At the end, I tried. And then he stopped trying. Stopped breathing. Stopped fighting. The machines registered nothing. The Whisper King was gone. But he didn't leave nothing behind. His mother mourned a son, but also grieved the son he could have been earlier. His men discovered that the empire was inherited by uncertainty, that control built on fear collapses when the fear dies. And Zarel stood at his grave, carrying not a secret anymore, but a memory, of a man who'd learned, finally, that surrender is not defeat. That being seen is not destruction. That the only power that survives death is the power of having been truly known by one person who loved what she saw. The Whisper King was dead. But Lucien Arvello, fully human, finally lived.